this session is going to be divided into two parts. The first part is learning to be a better editor. What I've experienced over the last years as an editor of everything from documentaries to commercials to narrative films to corporate films, different styles of editing, different target audiences, YouTube and whatnot. And then, depending on the time we have, and I want to squeeze it in, a couple of things that are unique that I like about Final Cut Pro that helps me do some things when I'm being creative that other nonlinears allow me to do. Something called Audition. If you're familiar with Final Cut already, Audition's a very cool feature, the magnetic timeline, being able to do dual system sound, and we'll get into that. But just to give you an idea of where we're going. So this is just, I'll let you kind of read this. I don't have to read it to you. This is just kind of a standard thing if you were in a lecture class. But I want to talk to you about how I make creative decisions, how you should make creative decisions, and more of the art of editing. And all this deck is available. Same email that I put at the beginning of the day, beginning of this deck. You'll see it at the end of the deck. If you can't remember mine and you remember Jeff's, still forward it to me. But you don't have to necessarily write everything down. And I'm going to cover a lot of references, a lot of book references. You don't have to go and read them all. I'll talk about some of the highlights. But sometimes it's really good to read, watch, in the case of one of my examples, books by editors and directors, kind of getting into their heads and why they do what they do and why they make the edit when they make the edit. And that's what I want to cover with first. And as I talk about the books, I'm going to talk about some ideas. So this is this came out in 2004, and I watched it on Stars, and then I realized, well, they have some I didn't even realize because I thought it was copyrighted. It probably is. It is. But it happened to pop up on Vimeo and YouTube. And I know it's also on Hulu if you want full resolution. I think this is like 480. And as well as other places. It's called The Cutting Edge. And this is, they talk to editors, they talk to directors, they talk to actors, and they give you a little bit of history. This is not boring at all. A little bit of history of, the first movies were just one single reel of film, or until the guy shooting it got bored and turned off the camera. That was going to the movies. And then they started getting into this idea of cutting and the whole history there. But it's not necessarily a history lesson, but it's the language of editing. And that's the thing that we have to take into account as an editor, is there are conventions and things you do when you edit for different styles of film or documentaries or whatnot that controls your audience. You're telling the story. You're the final storyteller along this pipeline of scriptwriter, director, and whatnot. You're saying, is the shot longer or shorter? What's it going to do? How it's going to make the audience feel? And hopefully give you some tips. Now, I thought it'd be fun. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You're tired. I was going to just show you the opening minute of that Cutting Edge. Let's see if I have that. There we go. We should have sound, and hopefully this will wake you up.
What makes a movie is the editing.
So that was just, a little bit of fun things I wanted to show you. It is an amazing documentary. It's about an hour and 20 minutes. It was made in 2004. I rewatched it again just actually a few days ago. and it's still, it is tight, holds true. Not everything is meant to be cut. Sometimes the longer the scene, the feel of the scene, and it talks about all that. And you get to hear it from the editors, all these Academy Award-winning editors. And you'll also get to hear from the director's point of view how they work with an editor and the screenwriter, because things do change, and everybody has their different style. So if you can find that, you can find it. I recommend watching it if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, watch it again. I always pick up things. So I want to use these as a springboard, some of these references. There's a series of books here. And I see that might be blocking my text at the bottom. But you don't have to go out and read all of these. But these are some good references. And I'm going to highlight some of the areas where I feel that you can become a better editor. I've highlighted them in yellow. I'll let you read most of this. I'll let you read all of it. You can read whatever you want. I won't read it to you. You don't need that. But editing is all about rhythm. It's visceral. It's not mathematical. Okay? What does something feel like? And the whole process in the editing is a series of, when I edit something, I usually throw down all my shots on a timeline. I don't worry if they're too long. I don't worry sometimes if they're the perfect take, if I have multiple takes. I'm just trying to get a feel for the flow of the story, and is that story being told? And something you need to keep in mind when you're editing, especially in case of a lot of you, you may be producer editors, writer editors, director editors, a hyphen. Your audience doesn't know anything about your story except what they see on the screen. And a lot of times we are so close to it that we cut some things together with the assumption that we know what's going to happen, and the audience may be lost. And that's true whether you're cutting something to tell a story, or you're making just like a 30-second commercial, or you're doing a promotional for a, I had the fortune, I talked to a couple of folks in my session, and one of the folks worked for, why am I blanking on the word volunteer organization? Nonprofits, okay? They have a different agenda than a corporation or a commercial. But in any case, the primary thing you always have to keep in mind is, what is the objective of the story you're telling? What is the outcome? What do you want the audience to do, or in some cases, to feel? And always keep that in mind, okay? First, you want to be able to get their attention, okay? And it's going to be different depending on the venue or the location that they're watching things. If they're watching something and they're scrolling through YouTube, or even worse, like TikTok, which is even shorter, you need to be able to grab their attention to get to your story quickly. You may know that it becomes brilliant in 5 minutes, but if you don't get them into that first 5 minutes, then they're not going to watch it, and you're at a loss, okay? On the flip side, if they're an audience paying to go see a movie, you can do a slow build or a slow burn sometimes. So this is important, okay? And so, with Walter Murch, it's all about rhythm and timing, and I really feel that you watch it and you go, something feels wrong, okay? Go with your gut. You watched movies all your life. You watched TV all your life. And I want to give you a couple of key pieces of advice that I learned back in college, and they have served me well. One, your edit should be a moment before your audience anticipates it. If somebody's watching a show and they're thinking there should be a cut, you are too late, okay? The idea for most editing that we are doing, stylistically, is not to see the edit, to have it fluid. Go from a master shot, and as the person's turning, you might go to a medium shot, and then they go into a conversation, and then you might do a couple of over-the-shoulders or reverse angles, and then so you're kind of moving in to tell that story. But here it's all about flow, so the person watching it, they shouldn't say, wow, there was a lot of good cutting there, unless, of course, you're watching it with one of your contemporaries, and, they're going, boom shot, mismatch, continuity. We're not talking about those folks, which could be you looking in the mirror. But they should just feel the story. If they're watching the edit and they're noticing the edit, they're not enjoying the story. They're not watching the story, which is the point. Now, I said in most cases, There are times when you intentionally use editing to abruptly disorient your audience because you're trying to do that. That's where you get jump cuts. That's where you may cut back and forth in time, wondering what's going on. You see that in some styles where it's like, is this a flashback? Is this not a flashback? But that's the style or the intent of the cut. Okay, so yes, as long as you know the rules, you can break rules. Okay, but in general, your goal is to keep it flowing so they can follow the story, enjoy it at the end, say, yeah, that was a great film. Yes, I want to buy that product. Yes, I want to donate money, whatever the objective is. And you're always trying to keep that in mind. So that's what you're thinking about cutting. The other thing to keep in mind when you're doing cutting, whether it's, again, a narrative film or you're just telling a story, is always cut on action. Our brains will automatically think the action is continuous. So for instance, if you were videotaping, recording, I guess we don't have videotape anymore, if you were capturing me speaking, and I'm talking here in the wide shot, and then I point to the screen, and then you cut to a close-up of my hand, that is going to be abrupt because I am static. But if you cut as I move my hand, the brain will follow the motion and say, oh, and you won't even notice the edit. So a lot of times you're cutting on things like a head turn, or eyes looking up, or people walking in frame or out of frame, if you cut on motion. Now, when cutting on motion, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. You can remove some of that action, and the brain will fill it in. So if you're looking at, say, I was lucky enough in my career to talk to a lot of different people who've done this, but musicals. If somebody is dancing, and they spin, and you pick it up a little bit later on the spin, so you don't see the exact cut, we know, our brain says, oh yeah, they must have finished turning. If I cut in my hands here, and then we cut to the wide shot in my hands, still moving but higher, it's okay, you really don't see it. It's when you repeat action that the brain says, oh, that didn't feel right. So if I'm swinging up here, and you cut to the next angle, shot, framing, and my hand's down here, it can be a frame or two, and our brain goes, something's not right. Something is not right. So those are things. You can take out action and tighten it up, but you can't lengthen, unless you're Michael Bay, in which case you've spent a lot of money blowing something up, and you have 27 angles, and you just see it over and over and over again. And there are times for that. And that's, again, I will emphasize throughout this hour, is there are rules. If you know the rules, you can break them because you can achieve a lot by breaking the rules and pulling people out of that moment, drawing their attention to things. Jump cutting, you can have a 20-second clip with 30 shots, and people can absorb that. But that's not something you would do in a long emotional drama. But it might be something you do in a commercial or an action film. So keep that in mind. Those are some of the basics. And we're going to walk through the slides, and I'll kind of point out some other things. And because we have such a nice, intimate crowd, if I say something that you don't understand or you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. I'll be happy to interact, because usually if somebody I've learned that if one person has a question about something, there's probably a half a dozen people in the room that might have that same question. Okay? So, this is the key thing, where people get too concerned with continuity. That, okay, we have to have all the matching action. You're cutting for emotion. You're telling a story. And something to keep in mind is, as time has gone on, as I indicated at the beginning of the session, the very first film viewings were just a single clip, a train pulling into a station, a guy digging a ditch, a person eating a loaf of bread, okay, and that was good. But as time moved on, we started cutting more, and people accepted that, oh, look, I'm not going to freak out that we're looking at a train station, and then we're cutting to somebody walking to the train station. So using that train of thought, if you watch something like a Hitchcock film, Hitchcock, brilliant storyteller, great at building suspense. And by the way, I'm going to go a little off tangent here because I think this is a valuable tool. Building suspense. If you have two people sitting at a table and a bomb goes off, what happens? Well, okay. you get scared, right? It's like, it's shock value. But if you have two people sitting talking at a table, and then you show under the table there is a ticking time bomb, and then you go back to the conversation, and then maybe the time bomb again, and then the conversation, and your brain is going, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Because you've teased them with this shot. This shot must mean something, even if it's only on their subconscious. So that's building suspense versus shock. Okay, so when you're telling a story, sometimes you may put a shot in that doesn't pay off till later. And I can know that like every one of you probably has a story of some show you watch which was really cool, and the second time you watched it or you go back and you see another scene, you go, the answer was right there in front of my nose. That, and then you go, that was so clever. Things like, first season of Westworld, I don't know how many people have watched it. It's not spoilers. It's been out for 6 years, and by the way, sadly, canceled. But they had a lot of little hints that there were time jumps. But if you're watching it, you don't realize but the second time around. So that's, again, where you're going into the art of editing, where you can add something that's discongruous to what's happening because it will pay off later. So Murch is, he's cut so many films. He, worked Apocalypse Now. He was the first editor to win for both sound and video editing or film editing. So his stuff is good. Now, going back to the original guy, this is the guy that said, yeah, we can cut things. We can tell a story, okay? And, when you look at this stuff, it's like, oh, that seems so archaic. But if you look at some of the early stuff that Eisenstein did, a lot of it's still copied today by building suspense, by being able to cut to reaction shots and close-ups, okay? So that's the whole idea of a montage. When do you use a montage? To build excitement, to tell a story, to tell simultaneous things that happen. I mean, the fact that I can tell a story and I can be in New York and maybe emotionally they're talking to somebody who is in LA and they're not talking to each other, but simultaneously something is happening that will affect both of them, we accept that. And it goes back to that Hitchcock thing before I did the whole suspense thing with the ticking time bomb. And that is, it used to be that people needed to be more literal. If they wanted somebody to go into a building, you see the guy drive up to the building, he gets out of his car, he walks into the building, he goes to the elevator, hits the elevator button, it goes in, you see him step in. Then you see a reverse angle, or you might see him in the elevator, and then you see him get out of the elevator, he's in the office, and the conversation can happen. Because it was literal, it was what the audience expected. You don't see that anymore, and what you'll see is in television and film is, you'll see maybe the guy driving up, you'll hear maybe the office sounds, and the next thing you see is the elevator opening up and he steps out. You didn't need any of that because the editor has allowed you to enter the office through the sound. And that's a big thing is, not just cutting picture, but leveraging the power of sound to move things forward. Continuous sound underneath, jump cuts and whatnot will smooth things out. Continuous sound where you have different action and they don't necessarily click will smooth things out. So you need to keep that in mind when cutting picture and sound, how important sound is, and doing things called J cuts and L cuts. Basically what a J cut or an L cut is, instead of cutting to a person as they start speaking, and then another person starts speaking, you cut to them, and then the first person, you cut back to them. That's one, it's very stilted, but instead, one person is talking, and then you may hear the other person answering, and then you cut to them visually. Okay, so you're leading the audio. And that happens in real life. If we were having a conversation here, and somebody over here asked a question, I'd hear you, and then I'd turn. Okay, that's a real-life J-cut. Okay, and so you do that, and it smooths out. It hides the edit. It makes it invisible. So that's where you lead the audio. And you can do that very easily because you can separate the tracks in Final Cut. On the flip side, there are times when instead of cutting to the person when they're about to speak, you may cut to them as they are reacting to the first person talking. So if two people are talking, maybe the story is not necessarily how the first person is presenting something, but the emotional way the second person is receiving that, okay? And that could be simply a nod just to smooth things out, or just maybe their emotion is changing. So never have to sit there and cut picture and sound simultaneously. As a matter of fact, most of my edits, I try to bleed the audio over in a transition of a scene, like we had the guy getting out of the elevator, or if you're having a conversation, not always cutting as each person speaks. That actually draws attention to itself. It's just as bad as cutting from me standing, pointing, and then you cut to a close-up of my hand. It is going to be very obvious. So he broke it down into 4 different things. We're not going to look at metric. We're going to go through that. But rhythmic editing is just based upon the information. You're telling a story, okay? Corporate stuff, whatnot. When you're starting to do tonal, you want to draw emotion out. Should the scene be longer because it evokes something? Is it so long that you're getting stressed and you're waiting for the next shot? Maybe you want that. I know there's times I've seen films where it's kind of like, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? You know, the camera's slowly pulling back. We know there's a killer. Camera's holding back. I can wait. We're going to see the killer slowly pulling back. It's like, okay, this is killing me. What's going to happen? Because, you know, you are putting yourself into the position of the audience who's never seen that. And then overtonal, that's just the abstract stuff. This was huge. I mean, it started back, you know, of course, in the 10s and 20s, became really big in the 60s. You'll hear avant-garde cinema, where, you know, it's just a montage of eclectic images, and by themselves, it's confusing, but again, you've created a feel or a vibe with that whole collection of images. So that's, and these are, you know, read the books, but I'm telling you the highlights. I turned in yellow everything, I think is key here. Oh yeah, this was my brilliant story that I already forgot about. So I read all this, blah, blah, blah. He has 7 basic rules of cutting, and I give you nothing until this next slide. And this slide has a lot of information that I think is really valuable, okay? You don't have to make you should make a cut, you should change to a shot, and everyone ideally should have meaning in a story. Whether you're at the point of directing it or cutting it, why are you cutting to a wide shot? Why are you cutting to a close-up? Do you need to? Are you cutting just because you're bored and you think the scene needs to be changed? Okay, is that the best reason to cut? You know, are you cutting, getting closer and closer to the person because you're getting more intimate and more involved in what's happening? You know, again, I go back to Hitchcock because, you know, he was a contemporary when I was a child. No, I'm not that old. But he had this great technique, and he did this in a couple of films, where like, and Frenzy was one of his last ones, not a great film, where, you know, a murder, it's always about murder with Hitchcock, is happening in an apartment. And the camera's going up the stairs, and it's going to the door, and what do you expect to happen? Going into the door and seeing what's happening. Just when you want to know what's happening, camera comes back. It's getting further away, medium shot, wide shot. It's like he is playing with you. And he is creating suspense because you're like, well, what's really happening in there? I want to know. Okay, so the whole idea when telling these stories is how can you manipulate? That's what we're doing as editors. We're kind of manipulating the audience to tell our story and to evoke any kind of feeling, whether it's drama or comedy. Comedy, it's all about, you know, timing. And so you have to work with that, and that's very key. Shorter is always better than longer. Directors love every one of their shots. Writers love every word they've ever written. You, as an editor, you don't know, technically, you do know, the script. You don't know all the trouble the director had in getting this one shot, or the actor had in delivering this line. You are the audience, okay? So you have to distance yourself and say, yeah, this isn't really necessary. Okay, can I tell the story without this? Is it a better story without it? You know, usually shorter is better. But there's times where longer, because again, I say break the rules, but where it's like you want to have that leisurely pacing. You want to have that slow burn, that slow build. There's cut on action, which I've already talked about, okay? Scenes should begin and end with continuity is the goal, so the whole film flows, unless you want to put those pauses in. A fade to black, this is the language of film. If you're watching something and it dips to black and comes up again, it kind of slows down the pace. It has a different vibe than if you do a straight cut. And by the way, a dissolve. We used to use dissolves all the time because we assumed the audience could not accept going from one location to another location. You don't see that pretty much anymore. But what we do see, or what we do hear, is the audio overlapping, or action going out or action coming in. So as soon as you cut to a shot, motion should happen, okay, in general. Yeah. And again, and I probably am saying this too much, these aren't like all written in stone. Because if you're going to another location and you want to establish that this is in the Sahara, you might go to a beautiful shot of the Sahara. Variety is good. Different takes is good. You end up only being able to use what you have, but don't be lazy and say, yeah, this is good enough, it tells a story, maybe there's another shot they can add to it. Maybe even framing that shot differently. One of the things I like to do when I'm shooting is, even though I'm delivering 1920 by 1080, I'll shoot it in 4K. Yes, it takes up more space. Yes, it's harder to work with, but I can reframe the shot, and by reframing the shot, I can be telling a different story within that frame for what's being focused on. Okay, so it gives me as an editor a little latitude. And you'll see this a lot. We do it digitally now. But back in the days when we shot film, you would go into in the transfer in the cine, and you'd say, yeah, I want to focus a little bit on here, and you would, reframe it. So you can do that, of course, in post too. But that's the nice thing about shooting at 4K and delivering 1920 is you maintain resolution. Most films are probably shot these days theatrically 6K and delivered in 5 or 4 because it allows them to do a little reframing and whatnot. Jump cuts you can get away with. I'm sure that most people in this room who have watched a lot of films with their friends, family, wives, partners, they're like continuity error, jump cut, ties changed. Only we notice this as editors. Boom, boom, boom in the side. I'm like, squirrel, boom. You can get away with a lot. I've had people go through a door and they're wearing, a completely different coat coming out the other side because it was a different day. Ideally, you don't want that to happen, but if you're cutting on motion, the person is watching the story. They're saying in their brain, I see a person going in, I see a person coming out, must be the same person wearing the same stuff. And then you go to IMDb and somebody points out that it was a 1964 Chevelle instead of a 1964 and a half Chevelle with, I think I'm starting to go over to My Cousin Vinny there. Good movie, by the way, holds well. So accept that. You're looking at things frame at a time. Remember, your viewer is watching it continuous, okay? And they're not going to go back and notice that some odd thing was there, like there was a coffee cup from Starbucks in the middle of Game of Thrones. Who would notice that, But, and if anybody here watched Game of Thrones, anybody here watched the new one, what are they called? House of Dragon. Did you watch the radio episode 6 that was so dark you could only hear it? Yeah, that was the big thing. It's like, it's a style. It's so dark. I had to turn off every light in my house to kind of see what was going on. So I disagree with that artistic choice. Okay. And the bottom line here is substance, the story is the most important thing. Don't compromise the story because you're hoping for continuity. Find a way around it. Another really useful piece of advice I like to give is watch television without sound and listen to TV without watching it. Now, people in the audience are shaking their head thinking this guy is a nut job. And your friends, if you sat down to watch an episode of a TV show and turned off the sound, would probably think the same of you. However, how many times have you been sitting in an airport or a restaurant that has a TV? Or for some reason, you're a new parent, you got a 2-year-old. I know somebody here has a 2-year-old because I talked to them. And you can't have the sound on. When you start watching things without sound, you start seeing the cuts. You start seeing the framing and the angles the director may have done. And you start saying, do I follow the story? What is happening? okay? Commercials are the best things to watch, 30-second mini movies. So if that presents itself, take advantage of it. Don't sit around and do it all the time, but say, oh, wow, that's a whole different way I'm seeing this. On the flip side, there might be times that the TV's on in the other room. You can hear it, okay? Or it's Game of Thrones, you can't see it. And start listening to what's happening in the audio, the sound stage that the editor has created. What's the transition from one scene to the other one? Can you tell the location based upon what nuance is there? Years ago, I did a commercial. It was a 30-second spot. It was, again, for a nonprofit on drinking and driving. We had like zero budget. And so the whole concept, I thought this would be a great concept to write. Drops of water coming off of a pipe, and the narrator's talking about all the list of things. These kids are, on the streets because of this. I don't remember the detail. And at the end, you see a wider shot. There's a bucket that drips, and it's full, and they just throw it into the sewer. Okay, we shot the whole thing silent. And it didn't take long to shoot, but it was visually kind of like engaging, but the audio, we spent 8 hours just mixing the sound for this 30-second spot. Because we put little things like horn honking, or a siren. What does that evoke when you hear a siren? But low, quiet in the background, maybe on the left channel. A baby crying, which, it pulls you into something. So we had this whole build of audio from a city, and so you felt that even though you're looking at this just pipe with a drip of water, that you were there in a downtown city with things happening that aren't great, like sirens and people screaming and children crying, and you're telling a story. So keep that in mind as the big picture, as the whole picture when you're editing something is how is the sound going to enhance or in some case distract or complement. Maybe it's completely different. If you ever, and I'm a big film nut, and I was talking to Philip, right? In my session at the break, and he's like, all these people, they're bringing up all these films that I've never seen, these obscure things. And it's like, something? There's a lot of films that that most of us haven't seen, or others have seen and others have not seen. So if somebody's talking about a great film, instead of saying, yeah, I don't know about films, it's like, that's great, tell me about it, and I'm going to go out and watch it. Why do you love it? Okay? So, of course, there I already diverged, and my train just went off the track to where I was going, but it'll come back to me in a second if I stall long enough. When you're referencing these films, I actually completely did blank out on that. Somebody knows what I was going? Nobody knows where I'm going? Good. So obviously, I need to play that video again to wake everybody up. It'll come to me. But let's jump through this and also jump through some other things. Dialogue React. I'm giving you the highlights. But some of these books are kind of neat because you're getting inside the head of an editor. And you don't get that a lot. In college, we're here, you get to talk about that, and teachers get to talk about that. But once you get out into the real world, you don't have access to this stuff. And this is my reference earlier about directors become very attached to a scene, and they're like, we have to put it in. And you have to say, I'm the audience has never seen this before. They're not going to miss it. I know you worked really hard to put this scene in. Anybody see the recent film with Nicolas Cage, Unbearable Being of Massive Talent or something? We got one person here. So here's the story behind it. If you watch the film, fun film, recommended. Transitions through genres seamlessly, very entertaining. But they had this one section of the film where there was a reference to this old film, black and white silent film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which I guarantee if I asked how many people here have seen it, nobody will raise their hand. Or one person, okay, the film studies teacher has seen it, and Cage loved it. That's why he wanted to do the film. That's how they got him to do the film. And it was this black and white avant-garde way of showing all these other classic Nick Cage movies, okay? So it's like, there's like a face-off variation of that. And they cut it from the movie because it took you out of the film. And Nick Cage loved it. Nicolas Cage loved it. The character is Nick Cage. Kind of a tricky thing. And by the way, it should be streaming any minute now. And basically he said, well, we'll put it in the DVD. We'll put it in the behind the scenes. But that was a perfect example, and I'm glad they accepted that if they left that in, it would have changed the tone and the flow of the film as much as they loved it. And what that leads me to, going back to that watching TV without sound and listening to TV without looking at it, is with DVDs, I know it's obsolete, and Blu-rays are relatively obsolete, but in a lot of the streaming services, they're doing it now, you have the option to see behind the scenes and deleted scenes with the director's commentary. And I highly recommend, if you have the opportunity to do that, you can learn so much about what not to add, because you can love something, and it's like, yeah, this is great, I love the editing I did. Does it move the story along? Does it progress things? Does it make it better? Or by putting it in, is it something cool, and does it make it a little bit of a lesser experience? So if you do get DVDs, rent them or buy them, watch those commentaries, director's commentaries, editor commentaries, the musical scoring commentaries. Sometimes you can find these on YouTube. People will post these things that were the extras, okay? And if you're streaming on Disney and whatnot, there's usually a thing that says extras, and you can learn a lot from what they take out, what they decide to take out of a film. And it can sometimes be a third of the film. I mean, it's amazing. There's a film called Cinema Paradiso, one of my favorite films. Probably only a few of the artsy people have seen it. It came out 20, 30 years ago. And up until a few years ago, I never realized they cut the last third of the film completely out. There's a director's cut with it, but they said, you know something? The story we told in the first 2/3 is perfect. It's the right length. We're going to go with that. So translate this into what you're doing when you're editing a story. Are you letting it drag on too long? Okay? Is it telling what it needs to? Is there enough? Important things. Cutting rhythms, because it's all about timing. It's like dance. I really think that. I think that if you've ever played a musical instrument, if you've ever done anything physical like dancing or even martial arts, whatnot, editing is rhythm. And that's why you play things over again, and that's why you go to the beginning. You're trying to feel the rhythm, okay? And not just between two shots. Yes, you're feeling it between two shots, but you're feeling it within a scene, okay? Why is it happening? Is this working? And whenever I've thought I finished something, I'll sit down and I'll show it to some friends. We'll sit down, I'll play it, we'll watch it. I do not have to look at their reactions, because I know as soon as I'm watching this with somebody else watching it, everything I did wrong in that edit. I will not cut myself slack. I'm like, oh my God, that shot's too long. They may be loving it. They may not even notice it, but I look at it with brand new eyes. That's what forces me to look at it with brand new eyes. Sometimes it's good to go away a couple days. We're always excited. You finish the show, you deliver it. Sometimes the client's waiting for it because, you know, they want it yesterday. But it is amazing how you will perceive something you've edited differently when you're watching it with somebody without even seeing their reaction. So that's one of the things that I like to do. And that's where it goes to, you know, the rhythm and the dancing. And then when an edit isn't working, because there's times you're cutting something and you're recutting it and it just doesn't feel right, you have to ask yourself, why isn't it working? Okay? It's hard being an editor. Look at all these questions. They think you're just pressing buttons. They're not hiring you to press buttons. If they're hiring you as an editor, they are hiring you ultimately for your art to tell a story. The tool is irrelevant. Final Cut's a great tool because it gives you a lot of flexibility. It lets you change things really quick. But if I had to hire an editor, I'd hire a slower editor that knows how to tell a good story than somebody who's fast that can deliver something that's, you know, So you constantly are like reevaluating things. I like this last quote. Again, you know, I was very fortunate that I had some great instructors when I went to university and embraced some simple things they said. When learning how to direct or tell a story, my instructor said, here's what I want you to do. Look at a picture, still picture, or a painting in this case. What's the story? How would you move your camera? How would you move people within the frame? What's important to the story from that photograph that you might want to focus on? You know, whose story is it in the painting that I may want to go to a close-up or I may want to frame differently, okay? And that allowed me to think from that one frame, one-dimensional idea to this panorama of ideas of how I can attack this. And what do I want to say by saying it, okay? So it's just little things, and these are things that right now you might have to consciously do it. But the more you do it consciously, like watching TV without sound and whatnot, the more it becomes second nature, and you walk into environments and you're like, I'm waiting for a friend, I'm sitting in a bar. What are those people talking about? I have no idea. What's their story? I have no idea. But let me make up a story. And how would I tell that story? And what's interesting in that story? You know, is it two people talking? Is one person uncomfortable? Are they playing with the napkin? Are they playing with their drink? Is that important? That would be a good close-up, okay? So you're thinking that way, and it just does become second nature. So when we're going to this, the lean forward moment, you know, that's the engaging moment. When you're telling that story, and this is narrative, but, you know, whose story is it? And is it changing? Is the dynamic changing in the scene? Does one person have more power at the beginning and the other one has more power at the end? And there's lots of ways to define what that power is. But, you know, who's the dominant character? How are you controlling that? What's happening from the relationship or the dynamic from the beginning of that scene to the end of the scene? And how visually can you tell that story instead of just listening to the dialogue of that story? Okay, and when does that change occur? This is just a great little reference about tactics. Steve Hullfish, he's been with Final Cut doing stuff. A lot of people who've been around for a while know Steve real well. But it's really nice. It's basically like sitting in, listening to editors talk to each other and saying, well, that's really cool. When I go to conferences, I love at the end, coming up at the end, even if I don't have any questions, and just listening to other people's questions and hearing the answers, you know, that, because I'm learning from their conversation. So everything is an opportunity to do that. William Goldman wrote The Princess Bride, screenwriter for a lot of things. Nice to see it from the other side. Again, the screenwriter stories and how it's delivered, and then talks about how he adapts it to a screenplay. I go into some of these references, not only because it tells you how to tell a good story, but to understand the screenwriter. And many of us wear many hats. We might be writing the script, and the script doesn't have to be a narrative film. It could be a corporate story that I'm telling, okay? You know, it still follows the same idea of what's the story, what's the message, how can you get it across, and realizing that your audience is starting from zero and you want them to get to a certain place. And it talks about things such as timing and structure, because it really is a lot about that. Good reference if you're cutting documentaries. Documentaries are hard because you usually have so much footage, and a lot of times you're creating the story with the documentary. It's usually a lot of things are being recorded, you get a lot of footage. What's the story you want to tell? Whose story is it? I can guarantee you, if any of you, how many people here have watched reality TV? And it doesn't have to be Housewives. Everybody should raise their, something you've watched is reality TV. But where they choose to focus on, and whose interview, and whose story, and who is the lead character is all decided in the edit, okay? Because there may be lots of sound bites and lots of stories, but you're watching it, and as you watch any of these shows yourself, you may get attached to a certain character, a certain person. Well, guess what? They're attaching you to that person. They're building that person through the sound bites and the visuals of who I want to like, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, what's the potential relationship with a glance. That's all done in post. Okay, you can cut something 7 different ways and have 7 different stories and 7 different happy or sad endings. Okay, and it's a lot of work, and it's just culling through footage and labeling it and tagging, which is what Final Cut does miraculously, I find. And I'm going to be using some footage here. I wanted to give a shout out to a friend of mine in New York, Stacey Maltin. She's just a lot like you guys, just about 10 years ahead if you're young, or she could be in the same thing. And she writes and directs and produces a lot of independent films, and successful enough that these have been on things such as Netflix, and you can get them on Apple iTunes and Vimeo and all the different things. But she lent me some footage that we can use for an example, so I definitely wanted to give a shout out to that. And for anybody who, we all are either working or trying to work in the industry, you always should have passion projects because, one, it's why we love to edit. I mean, I love to edit, I love to tell stories, But there's the work that you do, the grind in and grind every day, which makes money and puts food on the table, and then there's the story you want to tell, whether it's a script you're writing for a short film, or a documentary you're working on, or a comedy sketch you like. It keeps you excited, because the last thing you want to do is get numbed and not be passionate about what you're doing. So I wanted to thank her on that, and we're going to talk about some editing techniques. What's the minimum resolution you should be shooting something in these days to deliver? Part of that is going to be the limitation of your cameras and what you have. Nobody should be shooting in less than 1920, 1080, because no matter what, YouTube, television, otherwise it's going to get blown up. You can always down convert, and you want to make sure that in 5 years it doesn't look horrible, because if anybody's ever watched any kind of a video clip from 15 years ago or any standard definition, it looks poor. I usually find these days that I am delivering in 1920 by 1080. So 4K gives me the ability to blow something up 200% and not lose resolution. As a matter of fact, with Final Cut and the algorithms, I have pushed things 250, 300%, and you really don't necessarily see the problem. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to go dig up that footage, but I finished a documentary, and we had stuff all over the place, and some with it was 1080, but it was the softest camera I've ever seen. And trying to do a match cut, the worst thing, and if for anybody who's going to be editing a project with somebody, and they come to you and they're like, here's the footage, that's a nightmare. But if you can get them on board at the beginning of production and say, okay, here are some settings you want your cameras to be in, so they match a little easier, your life will be so much better. But one was shot on a camcorder that was like a Panasonic, that everything, the colors and everything was soft, and then the other camera was shot log, so everything had to be corrected, and then the other camera was shot normal, but 1920, and they just, I fixed a lot of it for the previs in Final Cut, but then I sent it out to a guy who all he does, and literally he spent 80 hours grading it, making it look right. But to continue on with the question, I really think if you can shoot 4K, you should shoot 4K, because worst case scenario, you use the whole frame and you still deliver 1920 by 1080 and it looks sharp. Best case, maybe in 5 years. I don't think it's really hard to buy a TV that's not 4K now. You go to Costco, they're all 4K, and then they have the one 1080, and then they have the $99 one that's 720. Somebody's going to buy that. But most people are seeing that 1920 by 1080, if it's shot well, looks great on a 4K monitor. So I still will do that. Do you need to shoot 5 or 6K? Not necessarily. I actually was talking to somebody in New York the previous session of this, and I told him, I said, oh yeah, I just, bought a new camera. I got the Sony A1. It was and it shoots 8K. And he's an editor. He's like, 8K, what, are you crazy? You work with 8K footage? And it's like, well, because I can. I didn't have a real good justification other than it gave me flexibility to punch in really tight. And the reason, and I'll tell you my reason for this one, is it was for a pharmaceutical company, and it was medical stuff and tight. And there were times when it's like, yeah, I framed here, and they go, oh yeah, but we have to see this bubble coming up here. And it gave me that flexibility. I think 4K is a comfortable, if you want, the Blackmagics and some shoot 5.6 and 6K, but 4K is a good place to start. I shoot 4K on my phone all the time. Jeff just did that session. I always set it to 4K because it gives me the ability to reframe, or if I get horizontal and vertical, I'm not blowing things up as much to fill the frame and getting soft. And that's just one thing, 4K. There's other things to keep in mind when shooting, and this is not necessarily that, this is useful anyway. You can also pick what format you're shooting, whether it's H.264, H.265. This is basically compression. And then there's things like ProRes, and then there's things like data rate, and this gets geeky, and then there's color space, how much color. Because, all the things you record, they're actually throwing away a lot of information. And they're, kind of putting it back in the computer. So if something is 20:1 compressed, here's just like a wake-up call. It's like, oh yeah, 20:1 compression. We can now fit it, on your thumb drive, whatever. You're throwing away 95% of the information that's hitting that sensor. Wow. And a lot of things are even more compressed than that. The big thing is black and white is your detail. Color is usually kind of an afterthought because our brains will fill it in. So if you ever see something like color space for how you record the video, you'll see things like 422, 411, 420. If you ever see that piece of information, 444. The first piece of information is the sampling of the black and white, the detail. That's really important. The other things they've discovered as they're trying to make smaller files is our brain doesn't really see color that well, and we just kind of fill in the blank. So I'm only going to use half the color information, okay, 1. All you need to know is if you add the numbers together, the higher the number, the less compressed it is, the more you'll be able to push and pull it when you do color grading, chroma key, or even trying to blow things up, you'll get fewer artifacts. So we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about frame rate, and we're going to talk about aspect ratio, frame aspect ratio. Most of the things we're doing for regular TV, if it fills the screen, it's a 16:9 aspect ratio. Old televisions used to be 3:4. The reason they were that is because that was the size of a 35mm piece of film. Okay, and then in the 50s, television came out, right? Everybody was there, right? And we were all there, no. The Jetsons weren't there yet either. But they had to make movies different, so what did they do? They made widescreen movies. Couldn't get that at home, okay? And that's where we got 16:9. So all the movies were like widescreen, and then what did we do? Well, we came to high def and said, well, let's make our TVs widescreen. 16:9, it fits perfectly. So most of the things you'll be shooting, whether it's on your phone or in most cameras, will have that 16:9 widescreen, fills the screen aspect ratio, okay? But when you get to real, I don't want to say real cinema, but when you get to viewing something usually in a movie theater, and these days even special event things like Game of Thrones or a Marvel movie and whatnot, the director can choose different aspect ratios. So, just to give that widescreen feel, or they shoot anamorphic or whatnot. So you're not stuck to the 16:9, and when you watch it on your TV at home, sometimes there's black bars, you see them, sometimes you don't see them, but that's because they want to give you that more immersive feeling. When you're editing in Final Cut, you have a couple of options. You can shoot it with special lenses to be CinemaScope or ultra-wide screen, and then when you create the project, if all your footage matches that, you can cut in that, and Final Cut works with it beautifully. The footage that if I ever get to showing it, if I looked at the original footage, it was shot 16:9, but when they delivered it, they cropped it. They cropped it down to, these are just numbers, so don't worry about them, 2.40:1. Okay, just think of that as wider. And what happened is you cut the thing, and in Final Cut, you can do this, or you can just do this with a grease pencil. You can put a little frame to say what's above and what's below what the audience will see. And what that gives you sometimes, and it goes back to the 6K, 5K question, is sometimes you look at it and you go, yeah, I just want to raise it up a little bit because I want their head to be higher in the frame, or lower it, because you know what it's going to be. And then you export it out at whatever widescreen aspect ratio you want. And some of them, if they're emulating the CinemaScope, it's like 3:1. Anybody see the film Maverick, the new Tom Cruise movie? Pretty good for a movie that I didn't expect to be very good. Great behind-the-scenes stuff, by the way. By the way, if you buy a movie, not a DVD, but if you buy a movie on iTunes or whatever, Vudu, Amazon, you get all those extras that you would have gotten on the DVD. So, I guess you do. I guess I forgot about that. And by the way, I always look for deals and wait till they drop to $5. I mean, I bought films that it's like, I know this film, I love this film, I own a copy of it, but look, for $5, I get all the behind the scenes too, because I want to watch it. So that's one thing you're dealing with for the widescreen. You can adjust that afterwards, and you might deliver it differently. Marvel. When Disney bought the Marvel thing, they released all the films in 16:9 widescreen. And then about 6 months ago, they gave the option, and if you sometimes go to that, they'll say there's two versions of it. There's an IMAX version, because what they did is IMAX is more square, which actually fills up more of your TV these days than their widescreen. So they're delivering it differently. So again, it's easy to do. You can fix it after the fact, or you can shoot it all that way, or a combination of the two. So that's the first part of the question. The other thing that I heard was frame rate. 24 frames, these are what you'll hear. And I'm dealing mostly with the US. 24 frames a second, 30, which is kind of like 2997. You'll see 60 frames a second. Those are the three popular delivery ones. In Europe, there's also 25 and 50. By the way, those numbers are based upon the electrical systems. We're 60 hertz, they're 50 hertz. In the old days of tube television, we worked because of their electrical system. Why do we have 2997 instead of 30? 30 makes a lot of sense because TV was 30 in black and white, but then they had to figure out how to bring color into it. That was put in that 0.3 subcarrier. There will be a test on none of this. You can impress friends at parties with this, and then they will walk away with their drink. But what you need to realize is that basically 2997 and 30 is about the same. 24 is considered film, and that's only because we were trained to see things that way. When you shoot something and play it back at 24 frames a second, there's some natural blur in it. So like if I went like this with my hand and I did a freeze frame, would that be crisp? No, you see a little motion blur. When you see credits roll, when you do animation, when you do something in motion, and if everything is too crisp, it actually, your brain says too crisp, okay? But film, we feel, should be 24. It gives the fluidity. A lot of people shoot it at 24. A lot of TV is 30 or 60. When you watch sports, a lot of time that is recorded and is shown at 60 frames a second because they'll freeze it or slow it down, and they really want to see the action. You know, they don't want to see, okay, here he's catching the ball. Oh, that's pretty blurry. Was he in? Was he out? So shooting higher frame rates and editing at a higher frame rate will give you sharper images but more jitter. And 24 will give you generally smoother stuff. Now, the nice thing about Final Cut is, and computers these days, is you can mix different frame rates in the timeline, and it will match it to whatever you set your timeline to be, okay, which is great, because in the old days, that was a nightmare, okay? So now you don't necessarily have to think about it. But those are some things to consider when you're choosing what frame rate and what frame size you want. But the nice thing is, the technology is so good. If you slow something down in Final Cut, there's, with the little drop down, if you've seen it, but know that you can slow down, there is an option that you can change on how it's going to create those new frames. Let's say you shot something at 24 frames a second, you want to slow-mo it, right? And you want to slow-mo it 5 times, so you're playing it back at 120. So if you just do it normally, you'll play 5 frames over again, and it will be slower, but it will look like this. If it's not a lot, if you shoot 24 and you put it out at 50, what you can do is you can say, I'm going to put little dissolves between each of the frames that are missing. Now, if you really slow it down, that's not enough. And what you can do, and again, I'm blanking, it's not called motion blur, it's called optical flow. And if you put optical flow, it does all these calculations and looks at where the individual pixels are going and creates brand new frames so that slow-mo looks smooth. So the takeaway from that little story is if you are slowing something down and it doesn't look good, right-click on the speed thing and switch to optical flow. It'll calculate it. You'll see it when you render it, usually on automatic playback, depending on the speed of your machine you own, and it will actually look nice and smooth, even things like credits. And then there's also, with text, you add a little bit of motion blur because it looks nice with a little bit of blur because nobody's really going to freeze frame the credits unless you're showing them your editing title on there. Okay, let's look at, it's 4:52. We start at 5:15. I'm going to jump into a little bit of Final Cut because it is Final Cut and I know you want it, but I hope this has been valuable information to help you become better editors. A lot of people say, okay, here's the tool. Tools are great. Final Cut kicks ass. I can cut something so fast and so easily, but it doesn't tell me how to be a better editor. It allows me just to use the things that I've learned. And I'm going to go through some of these quickly. The deck will be available. But, generally, my font is I don't like, is that when you're editing anything in Final Cut, whether it's a narrative or whatnot, you should take advantage of organizing that stuff. So if it's a film where I've actually done clapboards and shots, I organize it before I bring it into Final Cut into folders in the Finder. Okay? If it's a doc, it might be by location. If it's a corporate piece or a commercial, it might be graphics, it might be live action, it might be music and whatnot. Because then when I input it into Final Cut, I turn on a preference, which I hope is in the next slide. Yes, it is. Which says, when I bring things in, if anything's in a folder, make a keyword collection based on that folder. So I've done a lot of organizing already, okay? The other thing is tags. On a Mac, you can tag something, and if you look at your computer with tags, it's like red, green, blue, yellow, you know. You can also make custom tags, and you can right-click on something and say, make a tag, and you can say, this is B-roll, this is music, this needs a license. You're not doing this in Final Cut, but when you bring it in, it will, again, make keyword collections. And so I find this useful when I need to, like, say, oh, well, what music is temp music, are licensed or unlicensed, and I may have not organized it before. I may grab a shot out of my generic B-roll. Maybe it has the location on it. But you can put as many tags as you want in the Finder, and it will create keyword collections. It doesn't duplicate anything, but then you're starting off with everything pre-organized. Because the key is, if you can find it, if you can find alternate takes, you know, once you're inside of Final Cut, you'll be faster. And the only reason you want to be faster, other than getting home earlier, which we never do, is because it gives you more time to be creative, okay? If I'm running against the gun and I, like, 5 o'clock, got to get this done, but if I can get it done by 4, I can spend an hour tweaking it and making it better, that I'm happy with it and my client's happy with it, okay? Other things you can do inside of Final Cut. Take advantage of this. We probably talked a little bit in some of the sessions, hopefully, about ranges. We marked in and out points, okay? That's called a range in Final Cut if you're new to Final Cut. And I know some of you have been using Final Cut for a while. But I do this. I select a range, and I might say, this is a good take, this is a favorite. I'm going to add a keyword. And you can add, actually, multiple ranges to the same clip. Because if you're, and I'm going to actually show you this, because seeing is kind of believing, but not for long with AI. We'll go into Final Cut. And if I want, I select a range here. I just dragged it. I could mark in and out. But then if I had another part of this clip I liked, I lost that, okay? But you don't have to. If you hold down the Command key, when you drag, you can actually mark multiple ranges within a clip, and I can add a keyword to all of these. Or if I'm doing a situation where maybe they did multiple takes and the camera was rolling, or if it's an interview and the other points where I didn't select the range are just like the dead space of the person looking at their notes, I can mark that, say, as a favorite. I think it's the F key. Yeah, favorite, F key. Okay? So there it is. And if I look at this clip, I don't know which clip it is. It must be highlighted. And if I say hide rejected, it's going to actually break that clip up into 3 separate subclips, which I didn't show you very well. And I can just scroll through. Let me see if I can do that the right way. But it allows me to really get rid of all that extra stuff, and I can just go through the good takes if you leave the camera rolling. So the key is hold down the Command key, multiple ranges, and then you just make those favorites hide rejected, or you make ranges that you don't like. The flip side of that, let's see if I have something with a single clip here. Scene 6. Okay, we'll just take this clip. So it's like, oh, I don't like this. Range. Oh, this has all marks on it. Oh, come on, give me a clip. Be good to me. That one has stuff on it. Go to the party. Oh, because I'm still in rejected, thank you. No wonder it wasn't working. Okay, let's see, this should be just B-roll. So I could take this clip here, and I'm gonna go grab this range. What am I doing here? I am not knowing what I'm doing. I may just stop but basically what I should be doing, and the more I look, the more I'm doing it wrong, is I can mark the areas that I don't like and reject them, which is the delete key. And then suddenly, instead of having one long clip with junk that I don't like, I have individual clips of the takes or parts of the takes that I do. So it's just leveraging the benefits of favorites and rejected and keywords, because then when you're starting to look at things, you're a lot quicker. So I talked about this earlier. Sometimes I just like to throw things on the timeline, just see how the scene feels. Maybe I'll be switching things out. And then you can start leveraging multicam. If you shoot 2 cameras at the same time, you can sync them up in Final Cut, and then basically do a live switch, okay? To find out the details of doing that, just go to the Final Cut and say multicam, setup. Basically, it's going to sync them up based upon the audio on the camera. So always have audio going into those cameras. And then you can go through and you can do a switch and feel like it, but you can still switch things out. Because sometimes I'll do 2 angles and there might be 5 takes. So I'll ultimately be mixing and matching, but this gives me a sense of the rhythm, and once you do a multicam switch, you can still trim and edit things out. The other thing that is really cool is Audition, and I definitely want to show you this, because it's a feature that if you know it, you'll love it, and if you don't know it and you need it, you'll go, why didn't I know this last week? And what that does, let's see if I have a example of that visually. So I'm going here. I had this all set up beautifully before. There's multicam. So with multicam, here I had 2 cameras, an A and a B camera that were shot simultaneously, just different angles, and I can go in, select them both. And you can do this, by the way, with I think it's 64 cameras or something. But let's just stick with 2. And then what I'm going to do is say, create a new multicam clip. It's going to ask me to name it. I'll just call it the class one. And use audio for synchronization. If for some reason you didn't record audio, but you use a clapboard, you can mark an in point and use those. There's actually a variety of things you can use. And I'm going to say, OK. It's going to match those up. It created this brand new clip here with both angles. If you look closely, it has a slightly different icon. That says it's a multicam. If I open it up, under View, I can say Show Angles. So what I'm showing here is these 2 angles. There they are, synced up because of the audio. And if I take this and throw this into a new sequence, just new, and I'll never call it untitled, but class MC, multicam, OK. I can drop that in, extend edit, append edit, go here, blah, blah, blah. We don't like this. Cut away the beginning. By the way, if you want to cut anything to the left of the playhead, instead of slicing it, selecting it, and deleting it, you can hold Option left bracket. It cuts everything to the left of the playhead. And by the way, Option right bracket cuts everything to the right of the playhead. Great way to trim things. So here I have this scene, and I can watch it. I like this. It's a close-up on her, and I can either use keyboards or I can say, OK, he's there. Let's go to the 2 shot. We're watching it. Then I'm going to say, let's go, there's her reaction, the 1 shot. He's probably gone to the bar, so there's probably a B-roll somewhere. But I'm going through, and I can do an easy, quick switch. I can choose to switch just the video or the video and the audio with a setting. But what it does is it will actually make these cuts right here. And if I don't like where that edit is, I can do that roll edit that we learned this morning and tweak it. And the other thing I can do is if there's a scene where I just want to tighten it up, just like with anything, even though it's multicam, I can say, oh, yeah, I don't like what they're talking about. Cut that out. It's gone. Oh, too much. Bring it back. So multicam is great if you're shooting 2 cameras. And I highly recommend, this has 2 better cameras. I think they were Blackmagic. But, I've shot 2 phones. I've shot a B camera with just an older DSLR I had because it was good backup and I could sync them, and it saved me a lot of time because maybe something was blocking the main camera. So that's one thing I really like. The other thing is something called auditions. And then I'll do some wrap up, and then we will give you 5-10 minutes to get a break. So let's see if I actually was smart enough to create a project file, which I know I did. The question is, am I able to find it? Is it under sync clips? Is it under, it really doesn't matter. I can actually do this with anything. So if I have a sequence, and I'll throw some clips in. OK, so here's an example. I'm going to shoot here. These were labeled based on the camera, but the important thing is they were labeled by scene. So each of these might be a different take. OK? So I can go here, and I can say, I like there. She says the line here, and I like it. I'm going to put it into my sequence. OK? And then, let me just zoom out so you can see it. I'm going to go here, and here she says the line again. OK? So what I want to do is I want to have a choice. And maybe she said the line longer or shorter. Sometimes they may stretch it out. So if I drag this down and I drop it on top of that clip, it's going to give me an option when I let go. It's going to give me this option. Let me zoom in here so you can see it. Do I want to just replace it and I will replace it with whatever length that soundbite took, and then that could be it. But if I say replace and add to audition, or a variation is add to audition, the only difference is add to audition puts it next to or inside the other clip, but it doesn't change the one on the timeline. If I say replace and add to audition, take a look at what happens with the duration. She said it quicker that time. But I didn't lose the first one. And just to show you, I want to put another scene after this, just so you can see what happens. Do that. Going to extend edit so we can see it cuts to this. I want to go and see what the first read was like, because I want to see, well, which one's better? And I don't want to have to keep going back and forth. Because it's been turned into what's called an audition, I see this little spotlight. And if I click on that spotlight, I can go back and forth with my arrow keys. I'll zoom out a little bit. And I'm switching between the different takes. And all I have to do is hit done, and I can play that for myself or that for the director. And it's like, now, let me try the other one. And I click on it again, and it goes, oh yeah, I'm going to try this one, and I can play that one. So you can have as many auditions if you have 5 different takes, 10 different takes, and really get the feel for it, and it's not going to truncate it if she said something and it took longer or shorter, it just replaces it. And I don't know any other application that can do this. And if you really want, instead of doing it in the sequence, and I could drop more in, I could go here and say, these are the 5 takes that I want to compare. Let's assume I've marked in and outs. I can actually make an audition in the browser with different takes. So when I get to that line in the script, or I get to that soundbite by the executive who said it 3 times, I can throw it into my sequence, and it still's an audition, and I can switch between the 3 different versions. That, to me, is just brilliant if you want options. And guess what? You don't have to do it with 3 different takes. You might have it like, oh, you know what? I have a shot of San Francisco and a shot of Hawaii. I don't know which is going to work better. I'll make an audition with both of them. Oh, I don't know which color grading I like better. I'm going to make this one with this style and this one with this style to be inside an audition, and I can switch back and forth and show the director or show myself. So I just want to jump to the end of the slide so you can get my thing, and then we can set up for the presentation. So we're going to go here. The deck is available. I cover a little bit more in the deck because I'd rather have more information to give you than run out of time. There's multicam. There's audition. Talks about how I do it if you get the deck. Talk about, organize your footage into tags. We talked about that. Don't do any color correction until you're done your edit because you don't know what you're going to take out or put in. You might do a basic one if you shot it like, flat or something with a LUT, but do it when it's done. You do all your color grading at the very end. Do a basic one if you need to show it to somebody and something doesn't look right. Audio, in Final Cut, if you open up the audio panel and you have like 8 tracks and really you don't want all, you can turn them on and off individually and you can also separate them, but a lot of people don't know you can turn off tracks and makes them silent, but it doesn't get rid of them. Dual system sound basically means you've recorded the audio on a separate audio recorder. I think Jeff might have had one in the deck because we worked on that together. So it's just sound, and then you have it sync up with the picture. For instance, I may be shooting this class. I'm getting audio on the wide shot, but I may have mics on each of you. I can then sync up that audio by merging audio very easily in Final Cut, and then what I can do is control it independently. So if, for instance, I have, and I actually thought I did name this here, but we'll see if I did, B-roll sync audio, I did name that. So I have a situation, if you look closely, I have picture, I have separate sound. I'm going to select them both. So I recorded audio, and what I want to do is replace the bad sound with my picture, camera mic, with the good sound, external mic. I simply go and say synchronize clips, 1 audio, 1 video. I'll get a pop-up. It will turn off the sound from the camera by default, unless I uncheck it, and leave it there if I need to go back, and then use the primary sound from that separate recorder, which is a WAV file, and create a brand new file. And I can just edit that. It's synchronizing. I picked a big, long clip. So that's a cool feature. It's in the keynote. Go down, voice isolation. If you haven't tried this, if you're in audio, you have bad sound, a new feature within Final Cut. under the audio is voice isolation. It's amazing to clean things up quickly. You don't have to be an audio engineer. And that brings us to two things. We talked about J&L cuts. There's my contact information. And I want to just thank you very much, and I'll talk to you afterwards.